Aziz is too complimentary. He is actually very charming, and I'm not in any sense a mentor. What I am is I teach sociology in University College Dublin, and I have been a political activist since end of the 60s, 70s. I'm a socialist, and as Neem said, I'm not quite okay. Trotsky's. I'm not going to go into that now, but I am a socialist, and I am very much feel modest in the sense that I live in a democracy. I can go out and produce leaflets. I've only been arrested by the police twice in my life. I wasn't tortured. I don't face any of the repression that you face in Saudi Arabia. So anything I say is, it's in that context. It's a very different context to anyway, it's a very different context, right? So Aziz asked me to give a few ideas on a political party. Now, I mean, I am talking from a very particular experience. So just take the ideas as ideas. Don't take them as we say the truth by any means. So political parties, right? Well, I'll take a point from sociology. There's a German sociologist called Max Weber who said there are two types of parties. One is a party where people live for politics, and the other is a party where people live from politics. If you live for politics, it means you're quite passionate about a certain set of ideas, and that's what motivates you to build or be part of a political party. If you're living from politics, it means you see politics as a way of advancing your career or helping you in your life or essentially getting on in society. So some of you are from America. I would say the Democratic Party in America is essentially a conventional political party, operates often on the basis of what I call patronage. In other words, if you join the Democratic Party, you'll get certain goods going for you, maybe jobs, services, and so on. Whereas the party I'm involved in is much more of a for politics. It's based on ideas. People don't gain much by being in for-profit. And I assume most of you don't gain much from being in the diaspora party. Okay, so that's one basic distinction. So when we talk about political parties, there are different types of political parties. Obviously, they're on the left, the right, but even that basic distinction is quite important. I was asked, do you need an ideology? Now, again, sorry, say it again. Yeah.
And I'm saying your name right, Kieran, right?
Kieran, it doesn't matter. Go on. Yeah.
Kieran. If you allow me to ask you this. Now, we have a couple of questions. So the question about the ideology, what we are built on is an idea that demands to end the absolute monarchy in Saudi Arabia, and we don't ask for a similar ideology or similar beliefs. So as long as you believe in the freedom of speech and the equality between people, and you are asking for a political demand, which is right of voting or end of absolute monarchy, you can be part of us, or this is our movement. So our question was from one of the potential members that, is this qualified as a party? Should we call ourselves a party, or are we a movement or something else?
God, I mean, that's a very difficult question. Right, look, you are, from my point of view, in a very unusual situation because you probably are the last of the world's absolute monarchies. I mean, that's just the way it is. And what you're advancing is basic, what I would call liberal demands of you can vote, you can freedom of expression, and so on. Your problem, I just put it like this, put it to you, right, is that you're all in exile, and I assume the point of risking your lives in some ways is that you hope at some point that you're going to have an impact in Saudi Arabia itself to change that monarchy. Now, when I say ideology, I've discussed this with Aziz before. When I say ideology, I mean, if you're a small group, you have to kind of think through, well, how is it going to happen? I mean, how would you envisage the end of the absolute monarchy in Saudi Arabia? Do you think there's going to be an uprising of the people? Do you think I know people are cynical about that. Do you think that there's going to be a crisis in Saudi Arabia over oil prices or over the war in Yemen? Under what conditions do you think it might happen? So my point is, you can start by saying that we want to get rid of the monarchy, freedom of expression, but then as a small group, presumably you have to start thinking about how it's going to happen. And that will mean a lot of discussion and debate, because my experience, I came from a country back in the 1960s that was run by the Catholic Church. Not quite the same as Wahhabism, but not too far away either. And you had to kind of think, well, how would a small group of that stage, maybe 20 of us, how would we bring about change? And we had to develop a strategy. What do we think are the flashpoints, the contradictions in that society? So the simple answer to Aziz is, you start with a very basic set of ideas, but then you have to kind of think, well, how are we going to achieve these ideas and what type of strategies? And that will involve some debate amongst you, I think, maybe.
If you allow me with a follow-up question here, the situation in the Saudi opposition is the following. We have a couple of visions. So some say revolution, some say the system will change and it will be a constitutional monarchy. And we had that conversation between us, what's not popular and what's popular. But at the end of the day, we are thinking that we are using the methods to put pressure through the international community, through the countries we live in. Now, that separation, it's a basic separation. Guys, a question came to me. You can, this is a free session, so feel free to interrupt and ask in any time. I'm just moderating and you give me some questions, so I'm trying to clarify them. So that division for us is a separation way that I feel it's not necessary. We only are 100 all around the world. So if we want to answer that question, it will be a divisive question rather than a constructive question, in my point of view. But calling ourselves a party is a message that we are a political organization. We are not an NGO, we are a political organization.
Look, these are difficult questions, and I don't have all the answers to it. I mean, I understand what Aziz is saying, which is that, first of all, I think it's a very brave step to call yourself a political party in the context of Saudi Arabia, because you're essentially asserting that as part of a democratic process, there will be different parties, and you are now saying, we are a party. Okay, so that's one. And what I think Aziz is saying is, if the Saudi dissidents are so small, why push debates to such an extent that you split over the question of, do you want a constitutional monarchy or do you want a fully fledged democracy? Now, I've debated this with Aziz myself. I'm more for a fully fledged democracy, but look, I'm not dealing with Saudi Arabia. And I suppose the way I'd answer you, Aziz, is by saying that initially, you probably want to keep it as broad as possible, your political party. You want to keep it as broad as possible. But debates will emerge. You will get these debates. And I suppose what you have to do is find a way of having these debates and working. I mean, for example, Aziz has just made a point there that the strategy I think that he's implying is that you can go for a constitutional monarchy and you can get international pressure to support that project. Okay, that's a strategy. You have to work out, is that going to work? Is it not going to work? And I think you have to have debates amongst yourselves so you come to some conclusions over what is the best strategy for bringing about the change in Saudi Arabia. I'm skeptical of it, but that's me. I'm not in Saudi Arabia. I can't hear you, Aziz.
Mike, Aziz, your
Aziz,
mic.
you have to mic.
Yes, thank you for that. That's very clear. And the question will come in more details about our strategy going on. Anybody have a question or anything about this point, guys?
May I? Well, I don't actually believe in diplomatic pressure. I guess I do believe in diplomatic pressure, but this is not the kind of the kind of organizing I was involved in before. I really believe in grassroots movement, and I feel like in the Gulf it is undermined a lot, because if we have diplomatic pressure without the grassroots to back it up, then I don't think it's going to be effective. And I wonder if you agree with me. I wonder if you also say it's a problem, Kieran, that grassroots movements are undermined in the Gulf countries.
I do agree. I personally agree with you, right? So let's be clear. I personally agree with that viewpoint, right? I think that your problem is that Saudi Arabia is what I would call a regional power, now linked in with Donald Trump, with the Egyptian dictator Sisi and so on. And I mean, the way the Western world works is they will say things like, we want human rights and so on, but they really want their arms contracts and they really want their oil prices. Therefore, how much pressure they will put on without a movement from below is, for me, very questionable, right? Now, having said that, the second question is, back to people like I'm saying, is, so what does a movement from below look like in Saudi Arabia or even in the wider area? And how can you, in any sense, if you're in a diaspora, influence the emergence of such a grassroots movement?
If you allow me here, if you allow me to come in here, because there is a question we were asking, and yesterday we were having actually a debate about it, about our links and our connection with the people in Saudi Arabia. Now, let me be very clear. First of all, just coming back in the last point, I think the Saudi regime, because there is no voting, it doesn't have legitimacy from the people. So they get their legitimacy from the international recognition. Also, the fight between inside the royal family is supported by foreign countries. And we can see that the changes that happen in the past few years, that was the matters that was internationally brought up, like women driving and other stuff, cinema and other stuff, that the government was suffering as a PR from it. Now, this is my point, that the international pressure matter a lot. Now, the second point, we do have grass movement in Saudi Arabia. We have Hassan movement. I've told you about Al-Hamid. He just died a couple of days ago. Maybe you read about him, and Al-Qahtani. People are in jail. Like if in South Africa, we have our Mandela and he's in jail. We don't need to create something new. We have something we can polish and push for. People are in prison today. People who are professors, people who are judges, they are in prison today for this cause, for we are what's sitting here. Now, my question is, our problem with communicating with people in Saudi Arabia, what I feel, my most fear is that I can't guarantee that there is not, one of us is not from the Saudi forces. I can't believe, I can't guarantee that. So if you got seeds of revolutions and activists in Saudi Arabia, exposing them to the government is just giving a government a favor. No, we do the work that they can do. They can't do this work. We can do it. There is other work in the ground. We can do it, they can do it. So arguing what's more important is unrelative when we are arguing what can we do. We are in different countries, and these countries are supporting Saudi Arabia and gaining weapons, but it is a weak thing because we can't change it, because people are talking about Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia never have such a negative PR crisis in its own. So there is a fruit that's ready to pick up, and we are living all over the world. It's very unique that we can influence a lot of countries. We just need to link with the activists in those countries, like Mandela did, and like the Palestinians are doing now. This is what I believe is our role. Now, I'm not saying this is the most important thing, but this is, we are a small part in a very big change, a lot of elements. So we have to be smart and do what we can do. So this is my argument, and my question is, how do you link in such a society? We don't want to lose the people inside, but we want to have our connection with them.
Okay, first of all, I mean, okay, look, Aziz mentioned South Africa, and in some ways it's a good example because, I mean, you're right. The international pressure in South Africa was very important, right, in terms of bringing down the apartheid regime. There was a huge campaign, probably going over 20 years, where it became the norm that you didn't buy, for example, South African oranges. I mean, in Dublin, we had people walking out of a shop because they were selling South African oranges. You didn't support South African rugby teams coming here. So the international pressure was very important. And I will concede to Aziz, and this also went into the government as well. Some governments began to push against South Africa. But actually, and this is the important point, what changed South Africa, as well as the international pressure, was the emergence of a very powerful movement of, as it happens, young students who were told you had to learn Afrikaans, black students, and they began to fight back against that. And then you got the miners, and you got all sorts of workers fighting. So the international pressure can be a support, and it can help, but ultimately you have to try to get the movement going inside a country. That would be a point I would agree on. How do you get international pressure going? Well, again, I agree with Aziz. The two examples you make, South Africa and the Palestine case, these are very good examples of how the discourse of standing up to the Israeli regime is very popular amongst young people, very, very popular amongst young people today. And similarly, obviously, in the case of South Africa before that. So I think there's a lot of sympathy, because I think you are very brave in fighting this regime. There's a lot of sympathy for Saudi dissidents wherever you go. And I think, for example, I said this to Aziz, and we must do it when this bloody COVID crisis is over. If we have a meeting in my university about Saudi Arabia, women's rights in Saudi Arabia, whatever, you'll get a lot of young people. And therefore, you have to try to motivate them. And that becomes a pressure point on the state. And it becomes more difficult, I'm talking about the Irish state here, to do these economic relations with Saudi Arabia. So I'm for doing international work, absolutely. And obviously, you're in different countries. The only point I'm making, I suppose, is that, and I don't have the answers, I really do not have the answers, that will ultimately, the strength of that will rely on what gets on in Saudi Arabia itself. one other point to make, and I just throw it into you as a question, is you know that the Saudi regime is the main, I'm just have to use my I'm afraid my Eurocentric view here. It's like what the Tsar of Russia did in terms of conservatism throughout Europe in the 19th century. I mean, they were the whip for the most reactionary policies. Today, Saudi Arabia is the whip for the most reactionary policies throughout the Middle East, in Egypt, and so on. So the question really is, how do the movements in these countries either support or feed into challenging the Saudi regime?
If I may raise a question about influencing grassroots movements as the diaspora, as people who are outside of Saudi Arabia and people who have in large part left Saudi Arabia because it was no longer safe for us. We're kind of in a, like when we talk about influencing grassroots movement in Saudi Arabia, we're essentially talking about asking people to, you know, go out and demonstrate or talk about something publicly and, you know, do something that could really put them in risk when we, you know, when we have chosen to flee that risk. And so I mean, is there a way, in your opinion, maybe we could, I don't know, avoid that problem when like trying to influence grassroots movement? And is there perhaps a historical analogy where, you know, like someone in a, like people in a similar position, you know, you have like in Saudi Arabia, if someone's going to speak out, there are going to be consequences. And yeah, so yeah, I don't know to which point it's responsible to, you know, ask people to do that as people who are, you know, in those positions of privilege. And yeah, I don't know how to navigate that. Maybe you have some thoughts I'd like to hear from.
Well, again, I mean, I have lived in a Western democracy. I've only been arrested twice in my life. I mean, who am I to tell you what to do and so on? You asked for an historic analogy. Now, because I come from a left-wing Marxist tradition, I mean, the only example I can point to immediately is the Russian exiles in the early 19th century. I mean, from the different factions, they were spread into London, Switzerland, and so on. They put a huge emphasis on getting their paper at that time smuggled into Russia, put around small circles, and so on. Now, by the way, the Tsarist regime was less brutal than the Saudi regime. You ended up going to Siberia and you might be able to escape, whereas this lot are far worse. But that is an example. So what is the 21st century example of that? I think that we live, I don't know how it works on the internet and so on, but I think we live in a world where people can reach, this is the good thing about what's changed, you can reach people that are on the internet, on social media, and therefore the more you report things from that, what's actually happening in that country, small things, and the more people start listening to you, the more people start drawing connections. And then secondly, and you know this yourselves, you have to be very, very concerned about security. You have to ensure that people can use, if necessary, false names, that they don't have to show their faces, whatever it takes. You have to do all these things. I mean, that's all I can say on that. Yeah.
If I may, I wanted to clarify a few things about what I mean by grassroots. Aziz?
Aziz is not here. I will take over. You can continue.
Okay. So, I want to ask my peers to have some patience, because I know I keep bringing up the same points, but women's movement is grassroots, you know, something different than organizations, non-government organizations, and, you know, a group of men being able to do that, you know, announce an organization is also grassroots. A feminist who help women access abortion and birth control, for example, is an example, is an amazing example of what women do in Saudi Arabia, and it's beyond women driving cars. These women have been, and I was one of them too, and I'm still am. Well, but in a different way. I'm still trying to figure out how me being outside changes the dynamics. But for example, in 2017, we did yes, we can demonstrate and protest in groups, but we asked women to take parts in public spaces more often, and that was huge. It was covered in media coverage, like internationally. The British Independent tried to make it about the defense minister visiting the country, which was false. I didn't even know at the time that she visited. So it was huge, and it has such a global impact, even though it was grassroots. It was only women who had only their smartphones, and they tried to do the maximum, to use it to maximum capacity. And that is important, and I agree that we must be careful and not put them in danger, and be aware that there is a weird power dynamics, because we're outside. We can't speak publicly about opposing the governments, and they can't, but there is a huge and unnecessary gap between the opposition abroad and, you know, what happens, I think, in Saudi Arabia, and how people feel. And I think it is very important to elevate their voices. I don't think we put them in any danger when we simply are aware of their accomplishments, are aware of how their oppression and the oppression they're faced with daily, and that is missing. That is something very important, and it's missing. And I want to also say that it is very important that are being able to network with other people in the region is very important, because like Kieran said, Saudi Arabia has the worst impact on other countries, on other neighboring countries, and we must find our peers and comrades there and work and network with them. So yep, I hope I made some sense.
If you allow me, Mariam, you are not a party member, right? But you have such a unique voice and views. Our party is a good platform to convince people, because we are organized and we are there. So if you have a different opinion, a party is a live organization. So we are always richer by different and people who have a critic voice. And I agree with a lot of what you say. Now, if you allow me, we have, Kairon, some questions about the daily work. And maybe that's what we find, like you are fighting for big ideas. But for example, we had a WhatsApp group. This is where we meet. And we have a weekly meeting. So this is what we are keeping. But it happened that in one of our groups, somebody was nasty, calling names, another member. So how would you deal with that in your party? Like, it was really nasty, calling his mama a whore and stuff like that.
God, I see. You should give me the difficult questions. Well, look at
just to be clean, Kairon.
Just be clear.
We haven't been a political organization, and we really look high to freedom of speech. But on the other hand, you can't allow bullying. It doesn't work like
no, absolutely. No, well, okay. As you know, Aziz, right? In People for Profit in Ireland, right? We sometimes have occasions when people speak to each other in an abusive sense, right? So first of all, we have a code of conduct, which indicates that you have to treat people with respect, especially people you're working with in an organization, right? We're obviously a bit more elaborate. If we find that somebody has done something, not just verbal, but something terrible, we've had a case there recently. We have a complaints committee where we try to get people who are outside of the political leadership to deal with the complaint and try to deal with it. But generally speaking, we are against sexism, we're against racism, we are very much for treating people with respect, and that's the code of conduct that party members should adhere to. And if they don't adhere to that, then obviously they should be told that, and if it gets more serious, it should be processed, in our case, through a complaints committee. That's how it happens.
So what we did, just to recap, we take a vote and we take him out of the group. And we told him, you are not out of the party, but we have to talk about it. If you want to come back, we have to speak about what happened.
That's fair enough, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other question is about now all of us are volunteers, and we are targeting to put a membership of 25 euros a year. And we will try to get also members from non-Saudis. So we would be happy if you be number one.
Yeah.
That would be cool. The first non-Saudi member of our party. But saying so, our question was, when do you start paying for employees? And what's the difference between the volunteers and a paid employee? And how do you choose this employee? So there is a dilemma when we are all working and then income start to come and there is a load of work, or how do you decide there is a lot of work and who gets this job?
Okay, again, I just look at my own experience. So I have been part of a small socialist group that began with 30 members way back in the 1970s. Today, we've got about 2,500 people. We have members of parliament and we have 30 full-timers. So you're asking me, when do you get a full-timer? When you get to a certain size, first of all, you'll need to decide what the full-timer is to do. There are different types of full-timers, right? You can have an administrative full-timer that is simply looking after your website or making sure the minutes happen and so on. Or you can have what we call a field organizer, but probably is not relevant to you. So in a particular area, we would employ somebody to build up our organization, usually where we have a political representative, right? So and then we also have people who work full-time in the parliament. So when you get to my point is, when you get to a certain size, you need full-timers. But there is a danger with full-timers, I have to say this, right? First of all, to use a common term, full-timers can often end up substituting. In other words, they become the people who are doing all the thinking, all the organizing, and that's a danger. So we find, for example, where we have one of our members of parliament, we have 4 or 5 full-timers. The branch is very weak because they're all the full-timers doing everything. So be careful when you employ a full-timer, right? Secondly, be careful that the full-timer doesn't come to dominate your organization. The full-timer is not the pinnacle of wisdom. You know, you have to make sure of these things. So I suppose a simple answer is that at a certain point you will need full-timers, but there are some dangers in full-timers. Yeah, that's my experience.
Kieran, I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm really happy to have you here and to meet all the diaspora people and the guests. I just wanted to ask a question. When you say it's a danger to have a full-timer, and I do understand what you're talking about because it happens with groups that have like constant members that are just there all the time, and they just like people come and go, and these people are the ones doing all the work. But I think I just have a feeling that might work with a party with a specific ideology. Like it kind of comes back to the fact that we don't have a common ground. So if there is like a big movement in and out of members, that might change the whole party and like switch the direction of where the diaspora should start as and turn into something completely different.
I think that's true. Yeah, I would have thought. I mean, first of all, I'm talking from my experience. Just don't get me wrong here. I'm not giving any advice whether you should have full-timers or not. I'm just talking from my experience of the situation. But I agree with your general point. You're starting off as a diaspora, but I'm looking from the outside. I would say the Saudi regime has certain problems at the moment. Number one, the collapse in oil prices, and number two, the war in Yemen. And at some point, it'll face problems. And the question is, what impact will a small group of people outside have on that process? And that's a very difficult thing to work out. But you're right. So you can start off as a diaspora party, but the party will evolve. I mean, Aziz has outlined a particular strategy at the moment, but presumably you'll have these discussions amongst yourselves. And I think the main thing is to try to maintain as much unity as possible. Yeah. But you will try to work these things out. Inevitably, that'll happen no matter whatever happens. These discussions will happen. And then if you arrive to a more common ideology, yeah, that tends to go along with, we'll develop a full-time apparatus when we get bigger, and we will develop and grow and so on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, the next question was about, and guys, please, I can't find the question. So if you have the list, send it to me. Yeah. The next question was about, now, part of our work is getting non-Saudi activists to be active in our case. So we are around 100 Saudi around the world, and fighting a regime like Saudi Arabia, like they get to pressure our families. So we got a lot of cases where people pull out of the fight, right? So we are trying to build an organization that sustain on its own, and the idea of fighting for the people, right, of representation or ending the absolute monarchy. So our strategy is to have the activists from Europe and America and Australia and New Zealand, like you are a product of this world, your culture, your bravery, your care of the just cases in the world. And this is a good product. Like it is, democracy is good, and it have its good side. And there is a lot of activists who are willing, because the Saudi case is a just case. So our question is, how can we get to the communities and the NGOs or the organizations to get more members to join us, to support us financially, and to give us a base. For example, if the Saudi pass a death sentence against a kid or something, we can get people in the street in front of the Saudi embassies and a couple of so we have connections with the journalists, we have connection with the activists, we have connection with the political people. How would you advise us to get more non-Saudi members?
First of all, I would produce some very good material, good what I call propaganda material, well designed, outlining in very simple ways, taking up particularly, for example, the question of women in Saudi Arabia, making that very clear and very popular. So you've got good material and so on. Secondly, I would approach, I'm being a little bit cynical here, but sometimes you have to do things in order to achieve things. I would approach some celebrities. I would approach some well-known people that are willing to actually put a little bit of time into your cause. I mean, people will sign a petition. Anybody will sign a petition. But will somebody really begin to get a bit of passion and focus on the cause? So if you look, for example, at Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, the good thing about Corbyn, whatever your opinion about Corbyn, right, is that he was very passionate about, from back in the 1970s, about the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. He is a member of parliament, as a leader of the Labour Party, he just kept on focusing on that issue. So I would get a number of, I would network, and I would get a number of celebrities that are willing to seriously take part in helping you and strategize and so on. I wouldn't let them dominate your party. Don't let them dominate. They're just the celebrities you want to work with. You yourself have to make the decisions. But I think that I would do that. Other things we have done, I would develop a resolution, what we call a model resolution, which we send into unions, into civil society organizations, asking people to have solidarity. And lastly, I would network. You just need to get to know the sort of grassroots activists. I mean, okay, Aziz has emphasized a bit of diplomacy. I'm not against that, as you know, Aziz. So you can do all that. But if let's say the Saudi regime decides to do something and you want to have some protests across the world, the people who are going to do that protests are grassroots activists, feminists, leftists, liberals, whatever, you know, that's what's good. They're the people who are going to come on the protests, right? So you want to link up with them and you want to encourage them when something happens to do something. And I suppose the point I'd make, I remember one of our members, Eamon McCann, who's in Derry, you probably know him, Aziz, and he was the person who led the initial movement for civil rights where people were battened by the police and so on. And I always remember him saying to me, and you know what? There was a protest in Tokyo, Japan, about our situation in Derry, Ireland. And that did wonderful things for us. So the fact that people are protesting in Tokyo or Dublin, people in Saudi Arabia begin to hear these things. So it is important. So I think that that's how I think you need to make the links to get.
I thank you for the very good answer, and we are recording this, so I hope we'll take notes and work out of it. Now, and I will add one point here before going to the next question. Joining organizations and political party is a great way to network with people. So networking is very important. Guys, if I forget any question, please tell me, because we've been through them. Okay. Please.
The three vote method,
okay.
Pros and cons.
So we have in our party technique we've borrowed from the Pirate Party in Sweden that says if somebody wants to put something into vote, 2 active members should back it up, and then we put a vote in our meeting. So what do you think about this technique, and how was the balance between personal decision making and collective decision making? And I would like if you tell us a little about, like, you are not the president of People Before Profit, right?
No, certainly not. No.
What's your position?
My position, I'm the national secretary, but I think it's very important. Yeah, but I think it's very important from my point of view. never to put anybody on a pedestal. You understand? Put anybody on a pedestal. You know, you're the great leader. I guess that gets people nowhere. So it's important that people are modest and set about their tasks like that. Yeah, I mean the three-member vote. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, look, if you can't convince 2 other people to back a proposal, well, you're hardly going to convince 100 people. So it seems perfectly reasonable for me to do that, or for you to do that. Yeah, I think that's true.
Just one thing I have against the 3-year-old part, the 3-year-old decision making is that I feel like we need more central decision making process. The reason is maybe the pirates' way of making the decision worked because the cost of speaking up or making any kind of activity is easy. So any 3 people anywhere can make their own activities. While in Saudi, you have to be in exile. The cost is high to speak up. So I'm not sure. So you need some kind of a drive to move the party forward, which is maybe need to be more central. You need a more central decision-making process. Another thing is that we still do not have yet a general principle on the form of political regime that we want. So we're still working with the vague terms like free speech, more representation, nothing really specific. We haven't decided even if we want a constitutional monarchy or a republic. Like it's simple things, but we're not there yet. Question about Sharia, question about speaking against religion, or still this kind of question we're way too early to answer them. So we do not have a general form. So and in the group we can see some of us are atheists, some of us are very religious. Bringing these two kind of people are really not easy. So we need very wide goal or targets. And if you have this kind of target and you cannot have making 3 people making decisions, it will be very divisive and it might not lead to any kind of progress. That's why I believe more centralized decision-making process is way much better.
So I'm sorry, I misunderstood. When I was saying that I think that 3 people, I thought that was what I call a proposal. In other words, for example, at our conferences, if you get 2 people to propose it, it can then be debated, rather than just one individual coming along and saying, I want to put this idea forward. I'm not talking about 3 people going off by themselves and doing something, so I'm not quite sure on that. However, I just want to agree with your main point, which is that if you're facing an absolute monarchy, you will need to come through some central decisions. I absolutely agree with you. And your difficulty over a longer term is you will need to come to some decisions on strategy. Okay, we kind of have debates here about it and so on. You will need to come to some decisions, right? Now, I've had these debates with Aziz. I'm for a republic rather than a constitutional monarchy, but I'm not in Saudi Arabia and so on. You will need to discuss a party program, right? You need to have a program. You need to have, these are our, we have whenever I joined a left-wing organization way back in the 1970s, the first thing we had is, what do we stand for? Okay, it's a very simple statement of aims. It was only 300 words, but it was very, very clear. So you will need to discuss that, right? And then once you discuss that, I'm going back to an earlier point, then you'll have to start discussing, so what is our strategy for doing it? And you can have some differences between you and that, right? You will have differences between you and that. But the more you can take central initiatives, particularly against a dictatorship, the better. And if those central initiatives are very small, that we will have a day of freedom for Saudi Arabia in as many cities as possible, whatever they are, small initiatives, but the more you can centralize it, the better, I think, absolutely. But you'll arrive at central by discussing it democratically yourselves. You can't just lay it down as a law, an individual.
Any questions?
Sorry,
yeah, go on.
Uh,
Fajr, by the way, you
just
didn't
wondering,
introduce, if you allow me, Fajr, you didn't. Oh, Fajr, everybody introduced themselves, but you didn't. And
did I?
Yeah, so if you can introduce yourself, that would be cool.
Sorry, I'm Don, Freddie, Fajr, whatever. I'm from Saudi Arabia and live in Killarney in Kerry. I've been living in Ireland for 5 years now, and I'm part of People Before Profit.
I think I spoke to you on the phone.
Anyways, there was, yeah, there is one part which is, as People Before Profit is a Marxist group. So I don't assume that every single person in People Before Profit adheres or adopts like Marxism, like literally to its cores, like with every single like detail. I don't assume that like you are Marxism or Marxists as much as you are the laws and the changes that you're trying to bring through. So is it really very important to label the party with a specific in a specific like way of governing, as much as it's important to like work on the changes or like the laws that we're trying to change and the things that we believe in the constitution of diaspora? Don't you think that it's important? It's like it is what makes diaspora, not the label itself, but the constitution, the things that people believe in, which are like the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, individual freedom when it comes to having like LGBTs, and freedom of religion and all of that, and like all the other things, obviously.
Yeah, just again to explain for those not involved in People for Profit. So look, I'm a Marxist. I've been a Marxist for 40, 50 years. But to be honest, Marxists in Ireland, which was originally quite a Catholic country, very few people listen to us, right, in reality, right? So we adopted a different strategy, which is that we work in a broader organization. And Dawn is absolutely right. In People for Profit, there are a lot of people who are not Marxists. They simply want to fight for, I don't know, women's rights, abortion rights, for LGBT rights, and so on. And as we work together, we can discuss the ideology. But the ideology is not the main thing. The main thing is to start with what do you want to achieve. So I suppose in your case, you want to keep your party as broad as possible. You still have to work out what a program is, right? Are you for a republic, constitution, monarchy, and so on? And then you have to have a culture which allows you to have friendly debates like we're having here. And we're not going to fall out just because we differ over all sorts of things, but you develop that culture. And through that, over a period, you will work out strategies. So in People for Profit, although there's a diverse views in it, there are central strategies. You know, there are central strategies for a moment in terms of dealing with COVID-19. We're trying to get in touch with workers in factories and offices and so on and so on. So we work out central strategies. Can I just be really bold and raise a question of religion? Because a few of you mentioned religion. And I just want to say one thing as somebody. I just want to say, first of all, I got involved in politics because I went to a Catholic school and they made me do an exam in religion, and I organized the school students to walk out. So I hate religion. I'm an atheist, right? I hate religion, okay? That's my background. I'm an atheist still. However, it's very important to say, one of the things I've always learned over all my life is that a liberal-minded atheist who does nothing, you're far better working with a Catholic priest who's willing to do something. In other words, it's not the question. I mean, look, I have my personal philosophical views on religion, and because I was oppressed by it, I feel strong about it. But come on, it's much more important to work with religious people who are willing to do something, and we can have the debate about whether there's an afterlife or not, or what about Islam or Catholicism as we go along. So I don't think you should focus on religion. I
definitely agree with you. I'm an atheist, so I really agree that it's more important.
Sorry?
Some atheists in Saudi Arabia are such a huge disappointment. Like, they're supposed to be atheists, but politically speaking, they're right-wingers.
They're right-wingers, okay, yeah.
Problem right now, like, these kind of political views are supported by the government, and a lot of people in Saudi Arabia, regardless of them being atheists, like, it's weird, you know, this kind of how they see right-wingers and how they empathize with right-wingers in the United States or even in occupied Palestine. So we absolutely agree although to make it again political, maybe it would be good to be at least bold enough to say that we aim to separation of separating state from religion. I feel like we're there. We should be there.
If you allow me, I will go to Kieran back to the question, and I will take you, Zach. Just saying, in our constitution, we have very clearly as a party stated that we support freedom of belief and the freedom to preach whatever you are believing in. So we are totally clear, crystal clear behind that. Now, Zach, if you want to go, but I really want to go back to Kieran, because the question was about the day-to-day work, Kieran, and the jobs we do every day. So we want to learn more about that and our organizational structure. But I take a different direction when it goes to the wider strategy questions, where I have a point to say. When a question become a divisive question, where it takes us to two parts, like the question of constitutional monarchy or a full republic, it's a question about giving the people the choice. So going backward behind the question, give us the relief or take this divisive thing between us, because what we need at the moment is to work with each other, not to demonize or bring parties, because we are only 100. Like, we're not in Saudi Arabia. I know, like, logically, this party would be divided. Like, people in this party doesn't agree in a lot of things. So if there was a democracy, we wouldn't be in the same party. But we are in what we are in. So we are just trying to organize the people, and this is a goal on its thing. So I will take Zach, and then we'll go back to you, Kieran. Please tell Kieran, please tell us about the day-to-day work and the organization. And Nasser, you can ask him that point. Go on, Zach.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, although religion in general is a private matter and something that shouldn't be like a problem between people, but when someone's especially with Islam, when religion gets into one's political ideas and yeah, people start asking for certain religious ideas that might be oppressive to some of us, then that's something that's definitely going to have to be addressed and not just, you know, ignored. That's just what I had to say on that point.
Okay, my quick reply to that, I mean, this is a huge issue, by the way, but it depends how you think change is going to happen. In Ireland, when it was a very Catholic country, I always thought change had to come from the people themselves. Now, some of those people are religious. They don't agree philosophically with me. Why would I have a philosophical argument with them about religion or not religion? Now, I understand, obviously, in the case of Saudi Arabia, the regime uses religion in a particular way, a very oppressive way, and so on. But I'm sure there's lots of ordinary people there who are genuinely religious and have those views. So I tend to agree with, I mean, the most I'm talking about Ireland now. The most I push for is separate church and state, that that the state shouldn't represent any particular religion. There are different minorities. And by the way, when I say these things, the schools shouldn't be run by the church, the hospitals shouldn't be run by the church. I also say, and if a religious group wants to use the building of the school after hours to have their religious ceremonies or instruction, that's fine, as long as us Protestants, atheists, Muslims, or whatever can also use those facilities. So it's not, I don't think I'm against religion as such. Anyway, that's that. Aziz, I have to go, by the way, in a few minutes. Aziz is asking me our day-to-day work. What do you mean, Aziz, our day-to-day work?
So the question was, we have certain jobs or certain projects which have work connected to it, but we don't have a structural organization. Yeah. So how do you deal with that in people before profit? Like, we have people from different countries, we have people have different hours, and people sometimes who can give or sometimes can't give any hours. So how do you deal with that? Or that's the area we want to know about.
Right. Okay. I'm going to give you a factual answer, then I'm going to give you my opinion. Factually, we have a steering committee of 12 people that meets twice a week, and that group if you like, first of all, we have that group makes proposals, and then we have delegates coming from our branches every 3 months, and we try to get agreement amongst all the delegates, the parties come from different branches, how to function. That's in simple terms. But then we have other groups who work in the parliament and so on. But that's different to your situation. And in your situation, if you have 100 members, and I'm going back to that situation, I would think the less hierarchical you are, the better, because you still have to work out your views, and the more you can have discussion with everybody present, rather than just having a committee for a period. I'm not sure how until you come to a very clear agreement on the program, what you're going to do, I would have thought is better.
One last thing before you go, we want to tell you what do we want from you personally.
Yeah, go on. Good.
If you allow us.
Yep.
Abu Hakami, Ahmed Hakami, maybe take because he was the head of the parliament when we did it, so he's our boss.
Right.
Now.
Okay, good.
Well, we would like, if you kindly agree for these requests, we need, first of all, that you honor us and become a member of our party.
Yeah.
So officially join us.
Yes.
And if you would be kind enough and write an article in the newspaper, local, or if you can international, that'd be better, about us, about the party, and about our the start of our party. That's the
and
first
why
one.
You
the
joined
second,
us.
Yeah. Secondly, maybe a Zoom meeting with people before profit branches. We would send a representative to explain to them who are we and what do we want, and also invite them to join us. And third and lastly, a statement.
So if I can explain in that, just because I'm a member. So Kieran, and the meetings of the branches, we want to get like you get 10 minutes in the start of the meeting, you talk about the matter. So one of our members come and explain our thing. So this is our second.
And third and lastly, a statement to publicly recognize us and call for joining the party from people before profit. To the people of Ireland, to the members of the party, and to the supporters also.
Okay, look, I think those are perfectly reasonable requests. So what we'll do is, if you send me an email, I'll bring that to our steering committee, and I will say to them, right, I think this is very important, and that I think it's important. By the way, it's important that you do speak to activists in Ireland and also in Britain and in France and so on, so that you get across the feeling for Saudi Arabia in the same way the feeling is there for Palestine. So I think the more you do that, the better. So I will certainly support that and bring that up to our steering committee. And you'll send me an email to make sure I do it and check back, have I done it?
Will do.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It was
Thank you very much.
Meeting you.
Very much a pleasure, and I learned a lot. Listen, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
شباب تقدرون تقعدون معانا دقيقة إذا وقتكم يسمح. عبد الله تحب تقفل التسجيل؟
ايوه بس اذا قفلت الحين ما نلقاه
بتلقاه الله كريم.